Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, the Supreme Court today hearing historic arguments on birthright citizenship. The main question for the justices was whether lower courts overstepped their authority by blocking President Trump's January 20th order on a nationwide basis. Arlene Richards has the highlights from today's hearing. What were thought to be high-level talks between top Russian and Ukrainian officials turn out to be less so, as neither the Russian nor Ukrainian president is set to attend peace talks tomorrow in Turkey, leaving officials across the world with low expectations. Jack Bradley has the latest. President Trump secures another deal from the United Arab Emirates, bringing the total investment promises in the Gulf region to over $2 trillion. Iris Tao tells us how the U.S. is deepening AI links with the region to counter communist China. A terrorist in the West Bank kills a pregnant woman on her way to the hospital. Meanwhile, humanitarian aid may soon flow to the Gaza Strip as Israel says it now supports a new effort. Jason Perry reports. House Republicans are getting closer to sending their consequential budget bill over to the Senate. Melina Weisskopf brings us details on the latest advance changes to food stamps, Medicaid, and the pushback from a Republican senator.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. At the Supreme Court today, several justices appeared skeptical about the Trump administration's request to limit district courts' nationwide injunctions. Some say that if you limit the injunctions, people who don't file claims won't benefit from rulings. Here are some highlights from today's arguments.
Supreme Court justices peppered the Justice Department with questions on Thursday over its request to limit nationwide injunctions. Lower courts in 3 districts blocked the Trump administration from enforcing its executive order on birthright citizenship. The order limits birthright citizenship to children born to legal permanent residents and immigrants with legal status. Justice Elena Kagan questioned the government on what would be the quickest remedy going forward if nationwide injunctions were not allowed.
Let's just assume you're dead wrong. How do we get to that result? Does every single person that is affected by this EO have to bring their own suit? Are there alternatives? How long does it take? How do we get to the result that there is a single rule of citizenship that is the rule that we've historically applied rather than the rule that the EO would have us do?
Solicitor General John Sauer suggested that plaintiffs could file a class action lawsuit, which led to this back and forth with Kagan.
Rule 23 would be one natural path, assuming that a class could be certified, which we might dispute in this particular case.
Well, you might dispute it, and I think the question is there a class that's just all children of people who have entered illegally? Is that an appropriate class? Can the same thing be done under Rule 23? Or are you going to tell me that no, Rule 23 has lots of requirements and you'll never be able to certify a class like that?
Rule 23 provides the equitable tools subject to rigorous criteria, appropriately rigorous criteria, to obtain that kind of class-wide.
One of the biggest concerns for Justices Kagan and Amy Coney Barrett was that affected individuals who didn't file claims could have to wait years before getting any relief. Chief Justice John Roberts reminded them that the court has made quick decisions in the past.
3 years, 4 years, we've been able to move much more expeditiously. I think we did the TikTok case in a month.
Some justices mixed the merits of the underlying case with the question before the court, which is about nationwide injunctions.
The president is violating not just one, but by my count, 4 established Supreme Court precedents. So as far as I see it, this order violates 4 Supreme Court precedents.
Yeah,
and you are claiming that not just the Supreme Court, that both the Supreme Court and no lower court can stop an executive from universally from violating those holdings by this court.
Other justices expressed concern about how the states would carry out the law going forward if they ruled in the government's favor. Plaintiffs argued that there would be chaos if nationwide injunctions were not allowed. The Supreme Court will make its decision before its term ends in June.
World leaders expressed low expectations for the first peace talks between Russia and Ukraine since the war began. That says neither the Russian nor Ukrainian president will be attending. But President Trump still says he may stop by if it will help. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more on the talks in Turkey.
As the first meeting between Russia and Ukraine since the start of the war begins, expectations are low. Russian President Vladimir Putin not attending, sending an aide instead to lead the Russian delegation. World leaders calling this delegation low level. Zelensky was already in Turkey's capital of Istanbul to meet with Turkish President Erdogan on Thursday and potentially meet Putin. But he sent his foreign minister to the Russia talks instead. President Trump said that he wasn't expecting Putin to attend if he wasn't there himself.
And I said, I don't think he's going to go if I don't go, and that turned out to be right.
And that he may still go to Turkey for peace talks if he finds it helpful. That's as he's finishing up his trip to the Middle East with his last scheduled stop in the UAE.
Look, nothing's going to happen until Putin and I get together, okay?
Secretary of State Marco Rubio is facilitating these talks between Russian and Ukrainian leaders. Rubio said that these talks were initiated by Russia in the first place and that the U.S. came because they were told that there might be direct talks between top officials of Russia and Ukraine. But after seeing the negotiating team that Russia sent, Rubio said that these talks won't bear any fruit.
We don't have high expectations of what will happen tomorrow. The level of team that was sent by the Russian side is certainly not indicative of one that's going to lead to a major breakthrough.
That's as just outside of Turkey's capital, NATO foreign ministers Thursday meeting informally to debate whether to meet the U.S. demands of raising defense spending. 22 of the 32 member countries are meeting their initial aim of spending 2% of their GDP on defense. But the U.S. wants them all to reach 5%, saying that it'll make the alliance more self-sustaining rather than relying on funds mostly from the U.S. And at the meeting, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte also raised the threat of terrorism, Russia, and the Chinese Communist Party.
China is rapidly building up its armed forces, which is, of course, a big concern. They will have 1,000 nuclear warheads by the end of the decade.
The top leaders of NATO member countries, including Trump and his counterparts, are meeting in the Netherlands in June. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Israeli forces are searching for a suspect who shot and killed a pregnant woman who was getting ready to give birth. Meanwhile, humanitarian aid may soon flow into the Gaza Strip after Israel says they're supporting a U.S.-led effort to get aid into the territory. Jason Perry has the details.
On Wednesday night, Israeli forces responded to the scene where a woman who was about to give birth was shot and killed in the West Bank. A Palestinian terrorist opened fire on her and her husband as they were driving to the hospital. The woman later died. However, doctors performed an emergency C-section and saved the baby boy's life, who is in serious condition. The surviving husband received minor injuries. And the next day, he spoke at his late wife's funeral.
Words will never be enough to describe what you were for me, for our cute children, and for so many people whose life changed, thanks to your pure soul.
The Palestinian Authority, a political entity in the West Bank, currently has a policy that pays the families of terrorists if the terrorist is killed, injured, or detained while attacking Israelis. Israel's prime minister ordered a manhunt to find the terrorist responsible for killing the pregnant woman. Also on Thursday, an Israeli airstrike hit a building in Jabalia in the northern Gaza Strip. The Israeli military says they ordered people to evacuate the area before the strike. But a Palestinian boy was seen crying as an Israeli airstrike reportedly killed multiple people in the same city that day. And in a new development, Israel's UN ambassador says Israel will support a U.S.-led effort to provide aid to the people of the Gaza Strip, quote, very soon.
We will not allow Hamas to take advantage of the fund. We have seen what happened in the past. The packages will be much smaller. It's not going to be containers like we saw in the past. It's going to be packages per families. So we do encourage UN agencies to be involved and to engage with the fund.
But the UN says they won't be participating in this distribution of aid to the Gaza Strip.
As we've stated repeatedly, this particular distribution plan does not accord with our basic principles, including those of impartiality, neutrality, independence.
And while President Trump continues his trip in the Middle East, he told Qatari officials and business leaders that he had ideas about the U.S. turning the Gaza Strip into a, quote, freedom zone. Trump also said Iran should thank Qatar's emir because he's fighting for a nuclear deal between the U.S. and Iran to prevent the U.S. from carrying out military strikes. And Trump said he thinks the U.S. may be close to a nuclear deal with Iran. Jason Perry, NTD News.
President Trump secures hundreds of billions in new investments from the United Arab Emirates, the third and final stop of his Middle East trip. The UAE is also agreeing to further align itself with the U.S. on AI, that to prevent China from getting U.S. technologies. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more.
Receiving a grand welcome in Abu Dhabi.
We've become a very hot country.
President Trump announces over $200 billion in commercial deals between the U.S. and UAE, bringing the total investments from the Gulf region to over $2 trillion, all announced during the president's three-country visit this week.
And that's your biggest investment that you've ever made, and we really appreciate it, and we're going to treat you very, as you should be, magnificently.
The U.S. and UAE on Thursday also signed an AI agreement supporting the $1.4 trillion investment commitment the administration secured back in March. According to the White House, that includes the UAE investing in U.S. data centers and further aligning their national security regulations with the U.S., including, quote, strong protections to prevent the diversion of U.S. origin technology.
AI plus, it's a massive project.
The AI agreement comes as President Trump pushes for deals to sell advanced U.S. chips to Saudi Arabia and the UAE, which have been trying to become leading AI powers. But the region's deep ties to China had made the Biden administration cautious about the risk of China getting U.S. chips through the region to use for its own military. That resulted in U.S. restrictions on chip exports to the Middle East. Now, the Trump White House says it got countries like the UAE to promise that they'll prevent U.S. technologies from being diverted to China. But Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer warns that such promises need more scrutiny.
We have no clarity on how the Saudis and Emiratis will prevent the Chinese Communist Party, the Chinese government, the Chinese manufacturing establishment from getting their hands on these chips. That's why we've had such strong restrictions against exporting these chips.
Meanwhile, despite the administration's push, it remains to be seen, though, if China hawks in Washington would actually greenlight AI chip shipments to the Gulf region, as that does require a licensing process involving several agencies. Reporting by Iris Tao, NTD News.
House Republicans are getting closer to sending their budget bill over to the Senate. All committee work is done today after a 26-hour marathon to make changes to Medicaid. And late last night, a separate committee advanced changes to the food stamps program. NTD's Melina Weiskup has more details.
Late last night, the House's Agriculture Committee passed their portion of the budget bill, including changes to the food stamps program, like expanding work requirements for beneficiaries and narrowing the eligibility so that less people would be eligible to get those benefits to begin with. It also puts states on the hook to cover a portion of the costs and prevents the federal government from increasing the monthly benefits in the future. Now, the ranking member on the committee laid out her opposition, saying that there are already work requirements built into the program and that receiving these benefits aren't a means to survive. Meanwhile, the Republican chairman insists that over the years, the program has become increasingly more burdensome for the federal government to carry. As a matter of fact, it's become more of a burden since the COVID-19 pandemic. Listen.
Since 2019, SNAP costs have skyrocketed from $60 billion to $110 billion annually, an 83% increase, while enrollment has grown from 36 million to 42 million.
Folks, the average SNAP benefit is about $6 per day. Let me say that again, $6 a day. You don't build a life on SNAP. You build a bridge to the next paycheck.
There are also many similar reforms to Medicaid benefits, including work requirements, improving eligibility twice a year instead of once a year. The Medicaid portion also adds a requirement for some Medicaid recipients who make more than 100% of the federal poverty level to pay certain out-of-pocket expenses. It also disincentivizes states from allowing illegal immigrants to get Medicaid benefits. Now, one Republican senator is not too thrilled about the changes to Medicaid from his Republican House colleagues. Listen to what Senator Josh Hawley had to say.
I think that's clear. It's got to change before it can pass the Senate. And I continue to stand by my line in the sand, which is no Medicaid benefit cuts. Listen, if you want to do work requirements, I'm all for that. I bet every Republican and I bet most Americans would agree with that. But we're not talking here about just work requirements. The House goes much, much, much further than that.
His opposition is notable because he's not usually one to buck party lines. It also begs the question of how many other Republican senators share a similar sentiment. Now, this could create troubles for the House version of the bill once it makes it over to the Senate, if it makes it over to the Senate, because they can only afford to lose a handful of Republican votes in order to get this bill across the finish line in both the House and the Senate. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Coming up, Vice President J.D. Vance honors law enforcement during National Police Week, one of the largest events remembering the men and women who lost their lives while upholding law and order. Jason Blair has the highlights from Vance's speech and more. Law enforcement at all levels taking aggressive action to tackle child sex offenses. How have these heinous crimes evolved over the years? And how many rescues and arrests have there been to protect children? Kevin Hogan brings us a data report after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Vice President J.D. Vance spoke at National Police Week honoring law enforcement officers who made the ultimate sacrifice. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has the highlights.
We are proud to stand behind the men and women in blue, and we will keep on doing it every day for the next 3.5 years. God bless you.
Vice President J.D. Vance spoke to tens of thousands in front of the U.S. Capitol in appreciation of law enforcement officers.
These men and women chose their careers not for enrichment or self-exaltation, and as you all know, not because it pays better than every job on earth, but for the unshakable belief that we have a civilization that is worth defending.
He also spoke in honor of those who lost their lives while on the line of duty.
Their names will never be forgotten, nor will their heroic act of service, which inspire our nation and fill us with great purpose.
He spoke of a few specific cases, including a recent incident involving Deputy Larry Henderson, who was killed while directing traffic in Cincinnati, Ohio.
He was attacked and killed by a man he'd never even met. A man who we now know targeted Deputy Henderson simply because he was an officer of the law.
Vance's talk was part of National Police Week, a week of events which include a parade, conferences, a barbecue, and memorials. The vice president also hosted a law enforcement breakfast at his residence on Thursday morning.
How we doing, guys? Good.
During the breakfast, he says that the administration wants to make it easier for police officers to do their jobs.
We want to make it harder for people to sue police officers when they're acting appropriately in the line of duty. We want to make it sure so that when you guys are out there keeping us safe and you're of course worried about all the bad guys, you're not also worried about bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. preventing you from doing the job that the American people need you to do.
National Police Week started in 1962 with a proclamation by President John F. Kennedy. Since then, tens of thousands travel from around the globe to attend the event. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
Taking down child predators, that's what U.S. law enforcement at all levels is doing. Numerous operations have been undertaken to clean up the streets and the digital space. Our data reporter Kevin Hogan has the details on the latest federal bust.
I want to start with one of the most recent operations that we reported on. That's Operation Restore Justice. So according to the FBI, this operation saw the arrest of 205, that's 205 alleged child sex offenders. This number is very significant because, again, this is cleaning up the streets and the digital space, a lot of them charged with child pornography possession and other related charges. So they have been arrested, and at the same time, this operation has seen 115 children who are believed to be victims rescued. That's 115 that they thought were involved in these that are now no longer in harm's way. So very, very great work from federal law enforcement. A lot of local coordination was going in. The FBI field offices across the 50 states all working together to do this. Now, at the same time, we're going to break down the locations of the hot spots of where they were making big arrests. Look at this. This is information from the FBI that we were just talking about. These are the spots here that you see where all these arrests were made. Again, we examined about 150 of the 205 of them because those are the ones that were publicly available information. Look at this. You have 7 in New York. You have 11 in Florida. Think about that. That's Disney country. So again, a lot of kids go there. And where was the biggest one? That was in Michigan. You have 12 busts right here in Michigan. And some notable arrests that were made in connection with this were, for example, right here in Minneapolis, a former Army reservist and a police officer who are charged with protecting children was one of those arrested, alleged to be involved in some of these child sex offenses. And then here in Washington, D.C., there was a former NPD police officer also arrested, all in connection with this. Now, we're going to underlay the child sex trafficking cases per million in each of these states so that you can see how they compare to where these busts were made. So darker orange means that there were more child sex trafficking cases per million. Lighter orange means less. This is since 2000, and this is the Human Trafficking Institute's 2024 report. So you can see actually Alaska has the highest, although it has a low number, that's the highest per million, so the largest concentration. But I'll give you some examples, like here, for example, even in California, that's 170 child sex trafficking cases since 2000, and then so on. You got 96 in New York, and you also have in Florida, again, this is Disney country, 144 right here. So very high numbers of these very terrible, heinous crimes, as we've been mentioning here. Now, that said, when you look further into this, you start to realize that it wasn't just this operation. There have been many big operations cleaning up the streets from these child sex abusers, and one of them is back in the early first Trump administration, 2018. That's Operation Broken Heart. There were 2,300 suspected online child sex offenders who were arrested. So this more recent one, a little bit on the smaller scale in comparison to this, but all of them very effective in doing the work of law enforcement to keep the most vulnerable, the children, safe, right? And so, again, this is the DOJ information that we're relaying to you. Now, you might ask, well, how has the child sex offenses changed over time? Well, right now we're looking at child pornography sentences according to the U.S. Sentencing Commission. So right about the time that the internet was becoming more publicly accessible right here in 1999, 1994, that's right there. That's when it all started. So, I mean, it was only like less than 100 sentences per year back in 94. And then that has just taken this rapid rise you see right here in the last few decades. And then it sort of plateaued here. You're talking about 1,500. So, I mean, you're 1,400 in 2023, the last available data point that we have for you at the moment. I mean, that's about a 14-fold increase that you see in these number of child porn offenses, the sentences being handed down. Those could be up to 20 years in prison for some of those. But there's one key player in all of this, and that's Sheriff Grady Judd. He has to be included in this story. You know why? Because he has done so much work in this area. Countless operations. I'll give you a couple examples. Operation Maze Monsters 2023. That's 8 people that he arrested, his detectives arrested, who were involved with child pornography and other sexual offenses. And one of them worked at the Disney facility, and he was at the restaurant. Think about it. There are a lot of kids there. So, I mean, you got 8 here, a dozen there, 8 there. So many operations. I'll go down the list. Operation Child Protector 1 through 5, and then also several in the series, Operation Guardians of Innocence. So he has done so much work in this area, and it's just to show you how local law enforcement is taking the lead at really making sure that this type of crime is in check. And it goes all the way up to President Trump. He has even stated that he supports using the death penalty or life in prison for people who are charged with child sexual offenses. So definitely taking a very strong stance on this issue. Back to you.
Coming up, a bipartisan House panel delves into the CCP's military coercion against Taiwan, details on the hearing and China's plan to potentially take the island by force. And what was the biggest development to come out of President Trump's trip to the Middle East? And does the trip signify a shift in Trump's approach to the region? Former career diplomat Bart Marcois joins us to discuss after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. President Trump today made the third and final stop of his Middle East trip, speaking to American troops in Qatar. In a business roundtable with Qatari leaders, Trump expressed hope for an Iran nuclear deal and again proposed the idea of the U.S. taking over Gaza. Also today, the U.S. and the United Arab Emirates signed an agreement to build a massive data center complex in Abu Dhabi to advance AI capabilities. Trump's trip has yielded a growing list of deals with the UAE, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. Joining us now to discuss is former career diplomat Bart Marcois. He's also a former Energy Department official. Bart, thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you again now with all the developments coming out of this Middle East trip so far. In your view, what's been the most significant?
Well, I think the thing that signals the biggest change, I mean, the investments are incredibly significant. You're looking at $2 trillion worth of investments almost in the United States. That's going to be a boost to our economy that's immeasurable in terms of the follow-on effect, the multiplier effect, and so forth. But I think the really significant change in tone and from a diplomatic point of view is the change in approach to the region. President Trump said, hey, you have your culture, you have your ways. We're not here to impose our ways on you, our culture on you. You are tracing your history, and none of the things that we're looking at here that we think are so impressive in Saudi Arabia, in some of the other GCC states, are the result of American intervention for good or for bad. They're what you have done. They're what your people have done, what you've decided that you want to do. And then he went a step further and he said, we're going to recognize Syria. They need help. It's a new country. It's a new government. And we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt. He said, I want peace. And I'm serious when I say I want peace. And you don't get peace by launching wars unnecessarily. He's ready. He's tough. Nobody will mistake him for having, for lacking resolve. But he's coming out and he's saying, olive branch, olive branch, olive branch, olive branch. Let's make deals. Let's make money.
I want to dig into that because, when it comes to Trump's strategy here, is it a major shift in U.S. diplomacy in the region? Because, for example, he once accused Qatar of funding terrorism, and now he's struck a major deal with them.
Yeah, well, I mean, look at Syria. Shara, the new leader of Syria, was a terrorist in almost every terrorist organization. He was a fighter in almost every terrorist organization, and an officer or a leader, a chieftain of some sort. And Trump is saying, hey, it's a new time and I'm willing to have a fresh start. And yes, it's a change. And yes, Qatar, I'm very suspicious of Qatar myself. I think that they straddle both sides of the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Gulf. I think they play both sides of every game they play. And President Trump knows that. And he's saying, okay, you want to play our side? Here's how you play our side. You invest a ton of money that will benefit the American people. And as long as you're not pursuing a policy of terrorism support anymore, and you are benefiting the American people, I'm your friend. If you stop benefiting the American people and you start pursuing a terrorist course of action again, I'm your worst nightmare.
Now, in terms of the UAE, Trump is the first president to visit there in nearly 20 years. The last time was in 2008 with President George W. Bush. What are you expecting to see coming out of the UAE trip?
Oh, hearts and flowers. The UAE has been the real leader of the Gulf. Saudi Arabia gets the attention because MBS he's really a visionary leader for his country. He's developed it in ways nobody ever expected. He's loosened it and made things more free there. in ways I didn't expect. But the UAE is the real leader in looking toward the future and not looking back. They are the ones, more than any other country, that championed the Abraham Accords with the United States and Israel, more than any Arab country or Muslim country. They're the ones that really seized the brass ring and said, you know what, we are going to have peace. When the Palestinian terrorists tried to derail the continued progress of the Abraham Accords on October 7th, 2023, the UAE announced within a matter of days, we are not going back on the Abraham Accords. We are continuing with them, signaling to the world that this is a permanent normalization with Israel, something unheard of when I was working as a young, wet behind the ears diplomat in the region.
Well, expanding on that, Bart, with the ongoing Israel-Hamas war, what are you watching out for in terms of the Abraham Accords? Which countries likely to sign on?
Oh, I wouldn't dare predict that, Tiffany. I'm sorry. That's you're asking me to get out a crystal ball, and there are so many variables there. I'm sorry, I couldn't predict that.
Well, zooming out a bit here, how are you reading all of the deals so far? Are they to seal off Iran, more broadly China, from the region?
They definitely are meant to seal off China from the region. The Gulf states don't want China in the region, but they have been reaching out to China during the time when America looked like it was not a reliable ally. As long as America is a reliable ally, the GCC states will be reliable allies to us. If they sense weakness or inattention or hostility from us, they will go straight into the arms of China. And the Chinese are standing ready to welcome them. But they know that's a poisoned embrace. They don't want anything to do with the Chinese except as leverage to make sure that America doesn't forget them. And President Trump has signaled that so strongly. You could not have come up with a more definite signal of strength of the relationship than President Trump has done in the last couple of days.
Major changes for sure. Bart Marquez, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
U.S. military leaders warned last year that China is positioning itself to invade Taiwan by 2027. If that happens, it could tip the balance of power in the Indo-Pacific. A hearing today at the House Select Committee on the CCP examines Beijing's military aggression against the self-ruled island. NTD's Sam Wong has the details.
Let me close with this. We are not seeking war. We are trying to prevent one. And prevention only works if Xi believes that the cost of aggression is too high to bear.
On Capitol Hill Thursday, the center of the focus, China's military aggression against a self-ruled democracy that the CCP claims is a breakaway territory. U.S. intelligence and military officials warn that China is planning to invade Taiwan by 2027, an undertaking that could put America's security on the line and cost the world trillions of dollars in one single year.
When you look at the economic devastation that will occur worldwide if China takes over Taiwan, it will impact the everyday lives of Americans. It will further isolate the United States from influence across the world. It'll allow the malign influence of China to grow in a region that we cannot allow it to grow. And the first step is Taiwan. We've got to stand strong with them.
Despite having no legitimate control over the island, the Chinese Communist Party has stepped up war games around Taiwan in recent years. The regime mobilizes Navy, air, ground, and rocket forces, all to repel what Beijing calls Taiwan's independence.
Last year, Chinese warplanes flew into Taiwan's air defense zone more than 3,000 times. These red lines around the island are basically the path of Chinese warplanes as they traversed the air defense zone surrounding Taiwan.
The future fate of Taiwan could have national security implications for the United States. The island manufactures most of the world's semiconductors, a critical technology that Americans use in virtually everything, from computers and smartphones to military equipment like fighter jets.
What should everyday Americans know about China's military positioning against Taiwan?
Look, the Chinese entire apparatus from the People's Liberation Army down is built on both a one belt, one road that all goes back to Beijing. This is not about helping the world. It's about harming the United States. It's about enfranchising folks in Beijing and actually hurting the Chinese people themselves. We don't want to be in a situation 5 years from now. We've allowed the Chinese to have the upper hand, and they're the ones trying to dictate the terms to every American on Main Street versus us having the ability now to help drive a more amicable future.
Earlier this year, House lawmakers reintroduced the Bipartisan Taiwan Allies Act, a bill aimed at helping countries that could be vulnerable to the CCP's economic coercion due to their relations with Taiwan. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Sam Wang, NTD News.
If China invades Taiwan, it would hit the global GDP twice as hard as COVID-19. And how can the U.S. prepare, or even better, prevent a conflict? Hear insights from Iowa Republican Congressman Zach Nunn, who sits on the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party. Tune in to NTD's Capitol Report at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Coming up in the NBA playoffs, the injury-riddled Celtics and Warriors each played pivotal games last night with very different results. Dave Martin joins us to discuss. And a popular fast food chain is making some changes to its recipes. In-N-Out Burger announced it will be removing certain artificial ingredients from some of its menu items. Christina Corona reports when we come back. And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, plenty going on today, but let's start in the NBA as the injury-riddled Celtics and Warriors both played elimination games last night with very different results. How much do you think injury played in this series?
You know, for the Celtics, I actually thought it kind of freed them up last night. It looked like they had been kind of wilting under the pressure of being the defending champions. With Tatum out, it's like those expectations are pretty much gone now. They played great last night. Their ball movement, I thought, was exceptional. Their defense was great. They got great performances from Derek White, Jaylen Brown. Let's actually listen to what some of the players said after the game.
Yeah, like I said, we got a lot of people that highly competitive, and we got a lot of talent in that locker room. So seeing our brother go down was tough, and he texted us today before the game, like he's cheering us on. So that was cool to hear, and go out there and compete and win the game. It felt good. I got really good looks, especially to start the game, and so it's always nice to get those good looks and just shoot it with confidence. So shout out to my teammates for finding me, and just gotta rise up there and knock them down.
Well, first, let's talk about who we're playing. We're talking about the Celtics, defending champs, a team with a lot of experience, a team that just. Obviously, we've seen what they've been able to do over the past couple of years. Obviously, winning last year and what they've been able to do before that. So we're playing a really good team. And so obviously, we don't want to be minus 22 coming into tonight. But we got to understand who we're facing. And we need to be better, flat out. That's what that means.
So Game 6 will be Friday night in New York, Celtics leading that series 3-2. Now, as for Golden State, they were eliminated last night, losing to Minnesota, of course, without Steph Curry. They lost all 4 games in that series without Curry. They kind of lost their identity. They pretty much put him with some good defensive players, and it was a great formula to the end of the regular season. But then once he's gone, of course, it's tough to spread out that defense. Although I thought they lost games 2 and 3 really because they just didn't play with much urgency. But they just kind of lost their identity, I would really say, without him. Now, of course, we saw in round 1, Milwaukee losing Damian Lillard in that series for the rest of the year, too. So 3 big stars, injuries really affecting these playoffs here. In any case, congratulations to the Minnesota Timberwolves for advancing to the next round.
Well, tonight, Minnesota may find out who their next opponent is as Oklahoma City plays at Denver, needing a win to advance. What do you think of Denver's chances to force a Game 7?
I thought they were about 50-50 there until I found out Jamal Murray is now questionable for tonight's game with an illness. Now, ESPN Bet already had Oklahoma City as roughly 5-point favorites. But if Murray cannot play, there goes Murray, the Murray and Jokic pick and roll play that they use all the time in that series. Plus, Murray has logged the most minutes of any player in this entire series. Now, maybe he's able to play through it, and we have another flu game like Michael Jordan had 25, 30 years ago. Obviously, that's very difficult to do. But even with him, the Nuggets struggled in Game 5, I think down the stretch. I thought him and Jokic looked like they were getting kind of tired late in that game, and it showed as Oklahoma City came back and won. So we've got just one NBA game here tonight. Thunder leading the Nuggets 3-2. If they win tonight, they would advance to play the Timberwolves. And like I said, the Knicks, one more win for them, and they advance to play the Pacers in the next round. So some of these series coming to their conclusion. But I think this is the best one, though, the Nuggets versus the Thunder. I'm enjoying that one, so I'm looking forward to tonight's game. And that'll be at 8:30 Eastern Time in Denver.
Looking at the NHL playoffs for tonight, we have a pair of games as both Dallas and Carolina can clinch with a win.
Yeah, Stars lead 3-1 over the Jets. Hurricanes lead the Capitals 3-1. So to do it, though, both are going to have to get wins on the road there tonight. Now, NHL teams that have led 3-1 historically have won the series 91% of the time. Not surprisingly, Carolina has never blown a 3-1 lead. Dallas actually did once out of their 14 times. So we got 3-1 leads there. Edmonton, meanwhile, clinched last night with a 1-0 win in overtime. They are the first team on to the next round. And then we have the Florida Panthers, the defending champions, won 6-1 last night over to Toronto. So they take a 3-2 lead. So tonight, 2 NHL games and 1 NBA game. So not as much going on tonight. I don't know what I'm going to do with all my extra time here, but for sure I'll still be watching these games.
Well, you'll still be semi-busy then. Davis, always, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tiff.
In-N-Out is making changes to its menu in response to growing health concerns over synthetic food dyes. The California-based chain is removing artificial ingredients from some items, including 2 of its popular drinks. NTD's Christina Corona tells us more.
I'm standing outside of the In-N-Out in Baldwin Park, where the iconic chain announced that it's cleaning up its menu. In-N-Out announced that it will be taking out artificial ingredients from 2 of its popular drinks and changing its ketchup. An In-N-Out spokesperson said in a statement Wednesday, as part of our ongoing commitment to providing our customers with the highest quality ingredients, we have removed artificial coloring from our strawberry shakes and signature pink lemonade. In-N-Out will also be using ketchup made from real sugar instead of high fructose corn syrup. The move comes just weeks after the federal government announced plans to ban certain synthetic dyes due to health concerns. Last month, the FDA said it will begin phasing out petroleum-based dyes from the food supply over the next few years. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. called the dyes poisonous compounds used to make food and drinks more visually appealing. Earlier this week, the FDA approved the first 3 natural alternatives: Calderia Blue, butterfly pea extract, and calcium phosphate. Several more natural food colorants are still awaiting approval. We attempted to speak with several In-N-Out customers about the change, but were asked to leave the property before we could get any on-camera interviews. In-N-Out is among the first fast food chains to respond with recipe changes. It currently operates over 400 restaurants across the U.S. Reporting from the city of Baldwin Park, Christina Corona, NTD News.
And that's all for today's news. Around-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.